Hello ladies, here I am, Pragmatic Menopause Barbie, bringing you tutorials on managing your menopause your way so that you don't have a dramatic experience or a traumatic result that affects the rest of your life. Hey, did you hear the words I used to introduce this video? I used pragmatic, dramatic, and traumatic. And those are the three adjectives we'll be talking about today. This video will put into perspective the different ways in which your menopausal life can play itself out. And it's my hope that you'll see what a difference you can make by simply getting this education on menopause. So the three words that can describe your menopause are pragmatic, dramatic, or traumatic. We'll discuss each one, but I'm going to discuss them in reverse order. I like to end on a good note. And ideally, the only traumatic or dramatic thing you'll encounter in your entire peri- and postmenopausal life will be what you see in this video. So let's start with the word traumatic. Here's the definition of traumatic. A disordered state resulting from severe mental, emotional, or physical injury. So, how might menopause qualify as traumatic? Well, imagine having no education at all on menopause. Let's say you've heard the word, but have never learned what it means. And let's say you're the kind of person who only deals with things when you have to. You don't plan ahead. You just ignore anything that doesn't hit you over the head to get your attention. So, for the most part, you are entirely ignorant about menopause. Sure, you've heard a soundbite here and there about what's good for you or what's bad for you, but you never bother to learn more about anything you hear. You just assume that if that's what they say, you'll use it as your information source. So your menopause educators have been girlfriends with absolutely no credibility. And mostly, you've ignored the topic of menopause. You tend to tune out anyone who even mentions it. You just don't have time to be bothered. And suddenly, you start having all sorts of symptoms that bother you. Your periods become heavy and wacky. You stay moody and short-tempered all the time. You feel anxious. And you have headaches. You put up with all this for months, but you don't seek any medical help. You hate doctors. And you'd rather spend your time on things you enjoy. You believe that everything will return to normal on its own. But instead of getting better, everything gets worse. You start having hot flashes during the day, difficulty sleeping every night, and when you do fall asleep, you have night sweats. They wake you up and you can't go back to sleep. You get up and completely fatigued the next morning. Because you're fatigued, you can't remember anything, and that makes you irritable. You actually feel quite depressed. Because of your lack of sleep, your schedule is off and you're not eating correctly. You crave sweets, carbs, and alcohol. And since you eat what you crave, you're gaining weight like crazy. But your joints hurt too much to exercise. Not only that, your hair and skin seem to be freaking out. Your skin is dry and your hair is falling out. and your growing whiskers. As if all that weren't miserable enough, your vagina is so dry and itchy, you wonder if you have a perpetual yeast infection. Maybe you do, because you've had 3 urinary tract infections recently. And all this stuff going on down there is making you leak urine unexpectedly. Sex is out of the question. Not only do you feel unsexy, unlike ever before, you've broken out with a terrible case of acne. You have no idea what's going on, but you refuse to go to a doctor. And you don't dare discuss any of this with anyone. You just don't want to deal with it. You put up with this day after day. Over time, your relationships with other people fall apart one by one as they get fed up with your situation. A few friends have asked you what's going on in an effort to help you. Many of them have suggested it's menopause. But you dropped them as friends as quickly as the word menopause rolled off their lips. You don't want to hear what they have to say about where you might get help. As the years march on, you do nothing about your constant state of misery. You develop osteoporosis and break your hip. You begin to show signs of Alzheimer's disease. You have multiple medical problems. And one day, you have a heart attack and you die. Pretty traumatic, isn't it? All that trauma just because you refuse to educate yourself about menopause. Every one of those symptoms and diseases was a result of menopause. Shame, as they say in South Africa. But in South Africa, they say shame for everything. Something bad happens, shame. Something great happens, shame. You see a cute baby, shame. I never did figure out what shame really meant. No one was ever able to really define the word. But this traumatic sequence of events that I described is a shame. Okay, now let's move on to the word dramatic. Here's the definition of dramatic. It's a situation involving interesting or intense conflicting forces. So what would a dramatic menopause look like? Well, it would start with denial. Do you remember tutorial 62 on denial of menopause? That's when you know what menopause is, but you refuse to believe it will ever happen to you. You've got your head stuck in the sand. So, like the woman in the traumatic scenario, you just don't want to deal with it. But unlike the traumatic lady, you're not completely ignorant about menopause. Instead, you start having all those symptoms and you suspect it's menopause. You might even be sure it's menopause, but you decide to tough it out. You've heard all sorts of things about menopause and hormones, and everything you've heard has frightened you. So instead of getting educated about it, you decide to believe what you've heard. Furthermore, you decide to make all your management decisions based on what they say. You have all the same misconceptions about menopause that most other women have, and because you all share the same misinformation, you have no idea that it's all wrong. You and your girlfriends reinforce one another's fears, and you all make terrible management decisions for your menopause. Of course, since nothing you choose to do produces desirable results in either the short term or the long term, the journey through menopause and beyond is very dramatic. You're either miserable doing nothing, or you're trying something new that doesn't work, and you're still miserable. It's an endless roller coaster of drama after drama after drama. Your family and friends just can't take all the drama, so they become estranged from you. Your symptoms rob you entirely of your quality of life. And because you're shooting in the dark with your menopause management and focusing only on your immediate symptoms, you failed to learn about the long-term diseases associated with menopause. So you develop uterine cancer and breast cancer. You have a heart attack that you never even recognized as a heart attack, and you develop osteoporosis in your spine that results in a humpback posture. You never intended for things to turn out this way. You thought you were doing the right things to manage your menopause. How is it that you got it all so wrong? Well, the sad thing is, this dramatic scenario represents the majority of women. There's a sense of denial that overshadows menopause, and that denial stands in the way of getting an adequate education on menopause. The result is really dramatic and quite sad. Well, that, my friends, brings us to the third scenario. This one is pragmatic. First, a definition. Pragmatic means practical. It means logical or realistic. So if you have a pragmatic approach to menopause, it goes like this. Long before you ever begin to experience the first sign or symptom of menopause, you seek an education on the subject. In your 30s or early 40s, you say, gosh, it's inevitable that I'm going to be a menopausal woman someday. I can't predict when that might happen, so I'm going to prepare for it ahead of time. Your attitude is, why in the world would I ignore educating myself on the phase of my life that will last the longest and impact my life the most? And instead of listening to your uninformed girlfriends, you realize that they're clueless. Plus, you acknowledge that anyone with a product to sell you for managing your menopause is merely trying to sell you something. They're advertisers, not educators. So, you search all the resources for an unbiased education on menopause. And you find Menopause Taylor. You register for my 2-day seminar, or buy the book, or watch the videos so that you can learn everything you need to know about menopause and never have to worry. You're all set. You have all the tools you need to make good decisions for yourself for the rest of your life. You know you can manage your menopause your way, and you know the consequences of each option. When you begin to experience the symptoms of menopause, you immediately recognize them, and you tailor all the options to your own needs and desires, just as Menopause Taylor taught you. And you just don't understand why all your friends are so clueless about what's going on. You tell them there is absolutely no reason they have to experience all that trauma or drama. Your menopause is just so smooth. You can't understand why they've chosen to be ignorant or to stick their heads in the sand. So, I've given you 3 scenarios. Traumatic, otherwise known as complete ignorance. Dramatic, otherwise known as absolute denial. And pragmatic, otherwise known as thoroughly informed and educated. Which one do you choose? And if you haven't already chosen a pragmatic approach to menopause, are you ready to change your mind? All this reminds me of a great book. It's called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. This little book is very short. It's 93 pages and the font is huge. I mean, you can read it in 20 minutes. I think everyone should read this book. Now, it's not about menopause. So you're probably wondering why I'm telling you should read a book about cheese. Well, it's because it's a book about life. More specifically, it's a book about how people deal with change in their life. And menopause is a change in your life. In fact, some people call menopause the change. And what changes is that someone moves your estrogen. Anyway, this little book is super profound. I'll tell you the basic story. It's about 4 characters in a maze, like this. And the 4 characters are named Sniff, Scurry, Hem, and Haw. 2 of the characters, Sniff and Scurry, are mice. And the other 2 characters, Hem and Haw, are humans. Now, all 4 characters live in this maze, and in the middle of the maze is a great big mound of cheese. And every morning, all 4 characters get up and they find the cheese and eat the cheese to their heart's content, and they just love life. You see, that's what you do before you start experiencing perimenopause. You haven't a care in the world. Your body feasts on estrogen day after day, happy as a clam. But one day, one of the mice, sniffs the cheese, and he realizes that it's starting to get a little moldy. So he stands back and he sees the whole mound and he says, oh my God, not only is it getting a little moldy, it's also getting a little smaller. So, Sniff says, oh my God, this cheese is going to disappear, and one day we're going to wake up and it'll all be gone. So Sniff is appropriately named because he anticipates the change. He uses that first early sign of change as a signal that he needs to prepare for a new situation. So what does Sniff do? He hits the road, heads off to find cheese somewhere else. Sniff plans ahead. He didn't wait for the cheese to disappear. He goes in search of new cheese before he's desperate. That's the same thing as a pragmatic approach to menopause. Sniff's approach would be to anticipate that you're going to be a menopausal woman someday, learn about it well before you experience it, and be ready for the change in advance. The other 3 characters in the maze just keep doing what they've always done. They wake up, they eat the cheese, and they fail to pay attention to the fact that it's dwindling. They ignore all the cues that Sniff acted on. So one day, they wake up, and guess what? The cheese is gone. And all 3 characters are completely shocked. They didn't see it coming. Now you know that's not true. Of course they saw it coming. It was completely obvious that the cheese was getting smelly and sparse. They just chose to ignore it. They waited until they had no choice but to deal with the change. That's what most women do with regard to menopause. They know it's coming, yet they do nothing to prepare for it. So, on the morning when they discovered that the cheese is gone, Scurry, the other mouse, bolts. He says, cheese is gone, gotta go. And he heads off to find new cheese. So Scurry isn't a planner. He didn't anticipate the change, but when he came face to face with it, he didn't delay in doing something about it. He didn't waste time being in denial. He just acted immediately in managing the situation. This is analogous to a woman who doesn't act in a dramatic way. She just comes to my seminar, gets the book, watches the videos, does whatever she has to do at the first sign of menopause. She didn't get the education in her early 30s or 40s, But as soon as menopause presents itself, she wastes no time in learning what she'll need to know for the rest of her life in order to deal with the change. So she doesn't allow her life to become dramatic. So now we're left with the two humans in the maze. You do know that we humans are the strangest animals on the planet, don't you? Yeah, we are. And what do you think they did? Well, they did what most humans do. They did what you've probably done about menopause. They stomped around and complained a lot. They demanded the return of their cheese. They became angry, but nothing they did brought the cheese back. You see, the disappearance of the cheese was just like menopause. It was gonna happen no matter what. There's nothing anyone could do to avoid it. And like these two human maze characters, most women stay stuck in a state of denial or ignorance rather than anticipating menopause or getting an education on it the instant it arrives. So one of the little humans in the maze, Haw, reluctantly decides, oh well, if the cheese is gone, I guess I have to do something. I have no choice but to venture out and find more cheese. And even though he isn't happy about it, he reluctantly ventures out in the maze, not knowing what to expect. And lo and behold, as he explores his other options, he discovers so many things he never knew existed. He even finds that many of them are better than anything he ever had before. Just think, he says, if that cheese hadn't disappeared, I would have stayed stuck forever. I never would have ventured out of that maze. I would have stagnated for the rest of my life. Haw's experience is exactly what happens to women who attend my seminar or read the book or do something else to get an unbiased education on menopause. They discovered that they didn't know anything before. They realized that menopause gave them an opportunity to learn how to make the rest of their lives the best of their lives. They see that coming to my seminar may have saved their lives. So that leaves the last human, him. He's the only one left in the maze now. And guess what he did? Nothing. He sat and stewed. He refused to do anything about the change. He remained stubborn and ignorant, and he ended up dying because he refused to help himself. And that's exactly what happens to a lot of menopausal women. So, which maze character are you? How do you adapt to change? Which character would you play if this book were entitled, Who Moved My Estrogen? Do you plan ahead like Sniff? Do you act quickly when faced with change like Scurry? Do you reluctantly do what you have to do and in the process discover great new options like Haw? Or do you stay stuck and just let the change kill you like him? Do you see why Sniff and Scurry are mice while him and Haw are humans? Humans are not very good at adapting to change, but sometimes you have no choice. Menopause is one of those times. So please, please choose the pragmatic approach and educate yourself. Don't adopt the traumatic or dramatic approach and suffer. I hope you enjoyed my little scenarios and the synopsis of Who Moved My Cheese. Now I'm going to be pragmatic and end here. I've already planned the video for next week. Actually, I want you to know that I plan these videos 8 months in advance, and I shoot them 4 months in advance. I leave nothing to chance with regard to this education for you. I promise you, I'm like Sniff. I'm looking way ahead for you. So watch them in order and you will definitely understand everything. Okay. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and subscribe by putting in your email address. It's totally free and all the videos come to you in an email every single week. Thanks for watching. Bye.